everyone. Welcome to Take the Black Live, the only show on the internet where we talk about sci-fi, fantasy, movies, TV, books, legends like Brandon Sanderson,
Yeah.
notable TV producers like Ryan Condal, the books you have to read, the books you can't live without, and the news about the TV shows that you can't wait to hear. I'm Dan Selcke, the editor of winteriscoming.net or .com. And I'm here with Daniel Roman, the other editor of winteriscoming.com or .net, here to talk to you about all things you need to know. Daniel, how are you doing today?
Yes. Hello. I am doing good. I am mildly tired because I had a very, very late night, or technically early morning, of reading today to
Cool.
prepare for our show. So yeah, I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here and only mildly out of it. The bags under my eyes are real. That's not a special effect. How are you, Dan? And how are all of you in the chat?
Yeah. Hey, Benjack. Hey, Robert. Hey, Martha. Hey, Julie. Good to see you all. Daniel, I mean, you're not that tired. I love the way you've arranged your bookshelf. So there's Brandon Sanderson
Thank
things
you.
behind you.
Yes. So obviously we're going to talk about it. It is Wind and Truth Week. His late Brandon Sanderson's 5th Stormlight Archive book is out. So I am rocking the spirit today. These are my previous Stormlight books. I don't have Wind and Truth yet because it comes out on Friday. I'm also rocking my Journey Before Destination shirt. So it's going to be a good one.
Okay, I have two things to say. One, I was going to already, and one, I just came up with this question. You read Wind and Truth, the new Brandon Sanderson book, and you're going to talk about it. You're going to give your spoiler-free review of this yet-to-be-released important fantasy book, which is exciting.
Yes. So Wind and Truth is out. I was lucky enough to read it ahead of time. And because it's a very large book, I actually only finished it last night. So you're seeing viewers, listeners, you're seeing behind the curtain here on my sleeplessness. But yes, I have read Wind and Truth. We are not going to be giving any spoilers for Wind and Truth. I see Victor in the chat saying I'm only 25% through Way of Kings, but feel free to spoil away. I don't know how much we'll spoil Way of Kings. Probably a little bit, just because this is book 5. But we're going to be keeping this no spoilers for Wind and Truth, as low spoiler as possible, because I don't want to ruin anyone's reading experience. That is the thing of madness. So yes, very excited to talk about the Cosmere today.
The other thing I wanted to ask is Journey Before Destination a Brandon Sanderson thing, or is that just a Journey shirt? Like
it is. No, it is a Brandon Sanderson thing. So that is like probably the most famous quotable line from the Stormlight Archive. It's about these knights radiance, they swear oaths, and one of the oaths is like what is it? It's like life before death, journey before death, strength before weakness, life before death, journey before destination. So journey before destination is kind of a mantra for this series, which is fitting because it's a very, very, very long, big series. So you got to enjoy the journey because it's going to be years before we get to the final destination.
Sure. Faithfully before Don't Stop Believing. All right. Before we get to all of that,
or go our separate ways.
What? No, before we get to all of that, I don't understand. We have some cool Westeros news to discuss, some Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, House of the Dragon news to get to. It always happens this way. Like, it just kind of came on all at once. Let's start with the interesting news. So there's a new pretty House of the Dragon coffee table book just came out called House of the Dragon, Dawn of the Targaryen Civil War, where a journalist, Gina McIntyre, basically got access to the season 2 set while they were filming. So she talked to the cast and crew. She took some really cool photographs. Just really cool photographs and published them, behind the scenes stuff. Look, it's Daemon and Rhaenys, and they're talking, but instead of a beautiful cave, it's a blue screen.
Yes.
We got Daemon, Viserys, and Emma Aaron, Matt Smith, Patty Considine, and the actress who played Emma Aaron behind the scenes during their little dream sequence, but they're not very sad. They're smiling.
They're happy to be back together, if only in a traumatizing vision.
And there's just some cool stuff like that. So it is a neat artifact to get.
Totally.
I always love behind the scenes of these shows where the gorgeous dragons are actually big, blue, fluffy rigs of nonsense. So Emma Darcy's there, like being like, my son, he's dead. And you see the dragon in the TV show, like nuzzling her, but really it's just a big blue snout. Magic of movies, people. I think we have one more. And then, this one's pretty good. This is in the 4th episode, the Red Dragon and the Gold, the Battle of Rook's Rest, where Rhaenys Targaryen, knocked out of the sky, dies. They filmed a scene of her being dead, but they didn't show it. Well, that's what it looks like. Eve Best, blood in her mouth, on the ground. Queen Rhaenys, the queen who never was, felled, lying there, all dead.
Yeah, I'm glad they cut that. As much as I can understand why they filmed it, because there is I'm hesitant to say fairly famous, but like there's a relatively well-known illustration of Rhaenys and Meleys following the Battle of Rook's Rest that appears in Fire and Blood. So I totally appreciate their urge to film that scene, but leaving it out was probably right, because I think that episode didn't need it. It was fantastic.
I didn't miss it.
I didn't either.
I I know exactly what illustration you're talking about, but let's not act like it's famous.
Yes, the world famous drawing of Rhaenys and Meleys charred to a crisp on the ground. But no, I mean, among fans, it's fairly well known. So kudos them for filming it. Kudos them for killing some darlings and not including it if it wasn't right for the scene. It'd be nice, HBO, if you're listening, it to maybe one day get some deleted scenes. So we can see that emotion.
I would love that.
We do like a good deleted scene, and we know you have them.
Speaking, it is weird they haven't released anything. That is strange.
Crazy to me.
But I don't know. Whatever. Let's move past it. Yes. Speaking of House of the Dragon, the book also had some interviews with people, and probably one of the most interesting to me was this section where they talked about the end of the season. It's no secret that the end of the season, House of the Dragon Season 2, was a bit less climactic than folks were anticipating. The season kind of ramped up to maybe the Battle of the Gullet, maybe perhaps taken to King's Landing, and instead ended on like a montage of conflicts that are about to happen, but don't. Like the Dragon Seeds are getting suited up to go flying, but they don't fly. Daemon's got an army, the Lannisters have an army, Crystal Cole's an army, but they don't meet. The Triarchy is sailing for Westeros. It doesn't do anything. And we definitely, like, a lot of folk watch it and we're like, is there more? is that it? And we've always wondered. There have been like hints that they had more planned but couldn't do it. And in this book, they finally shed some light on like what happened. Basically, Gina McIntyre, the writer, is kind of narrating what people said about it. I wrote it down here. Crap. Did we not write it down? Okay. Give me 1 second. I will go and fetch it.
Oh, about what was said about this?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay,
basically, that according to the book, that the showrunners, Ryan Condal and the producer, Sarah Hess, had outlined a 10-episode season culminating in the deadly naval confrontation from Fire and Blood called the Battle of the Gullet, which is a big battle from the book. A main character dies. It would have been a good ending point. However, it soon became clear that the ambitious narrative taking shape on paper would necessitate an extended production schedule. Embarking on another 10-month shoot would have had a knock-on effect, pushing back the release of House of the Dragon second season until 2025, a prospect that gave everyone pause. So instead of their original plan, where they're going to have 10 episodes that end with a big battle that would have come out in 2025 next year, they went with an 8-episode season that ended kind of with a tune-in next year montage. Yeah. I guess the question is, hindsight's 2020. I don't know what I would have said at the time. I think having seen how the season ended, I would have just said, go ahead and delay it. Because I want to.
That's a tricky thing because we all would have been real pissed to wait 3 years.
Oh, yeah.
People would have griped forever, but
including me.
Yeah, including most of us here, probably. But this is one of those tricky things where it's like hindsight being 2020. The ending of House of the Dragon season 2 I think really hurt it for a lot of
Yeah.
people, because it is one of the few endings I can think of in recent memory where like I got done with it and my first reaction was, oh, people are going to be mad. Am I mad? I don't know, but people are going to be mad about this because it did really feel like a tune in next time in 2 years. So I I definitely think if I had my choice, I would have probably rather them push it back and include the Battle of the Gullet. There may be other details in there, like we don't know how all of this
Sure. The
falls in relation
strikes.
to the strikes,
Yeah.
because House of the Dragon filmed through the strikes, and that was a whole thing that happened.
Michigan.
Um, so yeah, I yeah, I mean, I wish they had ended with the Gullet, obviously, but hopefully it means season 3 will start on a very good foot.
At the same time, I recognize why you would want to get it out earlier because it is a problem of
Yes, it
these
is.
seasons taking so long to get out. And again, we said it before, something's got to start giving. Like, because at the end of it is, we are needy little babies and we want lots of episodes. We want all of them to be good and we want them on a regular pace.
Yeah.
And just if these studios are faced a situation where, well, we can give you kind of a bit of a letdown season, we can have it a bit earlier and it's still too long, or we can give you a full-throated big season, but it takes forever to get out. I mean, it is true it would please nobody. I think I'd be happier, though, if it was the full thing next year.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. We're all waiting either way. So it's basically, do they make
Yeah,
people wait a little longer and release a thing that's going to leave them wowed until it comes back? Or do they really churn to get it out and potentially underwhelm people? And it's not an easy thing. There's not an easy answer. I do think there's something to taking your time and doing the thing to the best of it, the abilities of everyone involved in it. And it does feel like House of the Dragon got dealt a bad hand this season.
that's true. That's true. I wonder if there are like ways to cut back. Like maybe just like, you know what? If you don't absolutely need to show a dragon, just don't do it. Something like that. I don't know. There have to be ways to speed this up a bit. I agree with Julie. Yes, we want it all and we want it now. And I know that's not reasonable to you, HBO, but it's the truth. And I think you should put your heads together and find a way to give it to us.
Yeah, well, I do think there is a commitment issue here that is probably a factor in this. Because, Game of Thrones, like, those cast members have talked about, like, it's not like they filmed Game of Thrones constantly, but they had a very regular schedule. HBO was very invested in it to the point where they weren't wondering after, I don't know, season 2 or 3 or whatever, whether they were going to get more seasons.
Sure.
And I think all of these studios have been a little tepid to renew. The Rings of Power, I don't know what they're doing with season 3, but they've been probably one of the few exceptions where Amazon has made it very clear they are not really pondering whether to renew it or not.
Sure.
But I think they've got to find some solution, right? Like, you've got a show like Silo, and granted, that is way less complex of a production than House of the Dragon, but they managed to get 2 seasons out in about a year and a half break. The fans of that show are pretty happy with how fast the turnaround has been for Silo. So you've been saying this for a while. The show that the big genre show that figures out how to do new seasons every year is gonna really make waves, because at this point, it's been a long time since we've had one of those.
I agree with Victor. That I think that if we fill in more with our imagination, the studios want to believe. There probably are really intelligent ways to cut back on the giant effects stuff and just have really strong writing fundamentals in it and in place. And we'll be more happy, not less, if we get it regularly and the quality doesn't go down. I think that's probably true. But hey, change takes time. The winds of time move slowly. That doesn't make any sense. I mix like 3 metaphors in there. But we'll hope for the best.
Yeah.
Speaking of
the winds of time,
as Retro Replay says, remember when they made 20 episodes seasons every year? I do. I'm old enough to remember that. Of course, back then we had things like filler episodes, and those weren't terribly fun either, although they could be cute.
I like a good filler episode.
Yeah, it can be nice. And then just the production was it even close to what it is now?
Yes.
It's pros and cons across the board.
It is. It is. There are no simple answers to this. I do empathize with the conundrum studios are facing, but I think there's got to be some better solution. Regardless, what happened with House of the Dragon season 2 is probably emblematic of it not going the way anyone really wanted it to. But
not quite.
If there's going to be any,
although I liked it,
if there's going to be any Westeros show, perhaps that could break this mold, but probably won't because I think they're spacing them out. So I don't think the cards are in its favor. It could be A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the other Westeros show that we have news for this week. The Warner Brothers Discovery Global Streaming Chief, J.B. Perrett, did a media conference, I guess this week. Variety reported on this today, where he basically said they're expecting A Night of the Seven Kingdoms in, quote, summer 2025. Variety says, that dude's crazy. We hear it's coming in, quote, late 2025. So regardless of exactly what's right here, I think we can expect A Night of the Seven Kingdoms to come in the second half of next year.
Sure. Let's go ahead and say that.
Yeah.
Night of the Seven Kingdoms, back half of 2025.
Yes.
Which, yeah, sure, whatever, work. And even that is a bit smaller, 6 episodes.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it, though. I can't wait to start reading those books, man.
Yeah. You're going to power through them. They're not long.
Well, then I'll read a page a day, so I prolong it.
Nice.
But I'll update that on you as I get there. And I guess if there's no other comments on that, you know what? Retro, I got to read this comment because I loved Buffy.
Yeah.
Retro Replay says Buffy had a single narrative arc every season, worked for that show. Yeah, there's definitely a way to balance this kind of stuff. I was a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan back in the day, and you're right; those seasons worked really well. If you watch an old episode of Buffy, next episode of Game of Thrones, or House of the Dragon, you can notice the difference in production quality. It looks a lot more like TV. And we've gotten to a place where either studios are convinced that we need, or we're convinced that we need, a higher level of production. It's kind of like a virtuous spiral that can become a vicious spiral. It's still in the process of being worked out. I'm not sure where it'll land, but we'll see. Anyway, Dan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Ben Jack says the last day of summer is September 22nd, and the first day of Q4 is October 1st. So not really much of a shift in the Variety correction. That's true, and also I appreciate you basing your understanding of the summer on the solstices there, Ben Jack. Anytime someone says summer in a press thing, I think June, July, August, but that is true. It could be in September. And yeah.
Okay. I got
you. Yeah. So do you have anything else you want to say about Westeros before we move into the more stranger and fantastical space of the Cosmere?
No. Daniel, I'm very curious to hear your spoiler-free review of Wind and Truth, the 5th novel in Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series. Someone up there asked if I'd ever read the Cosmere. I've read the Mistborn trilogy. Does that count?
Yeah, it counts. That is quintessential Cosmere.
Okay, then I have.
Yes. Yeah. So, and just for reference here for viewers and listeners, I'm more or less current on the Cosmere. There are a handful of books I haven't read. I haven't read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter yet, or Tress of the Emerald Sea. The only other big one that I haven't read is The Lost Metal, which I am probably going to read before the end of the year. That's the 4th Wax and Wayne book. But so yeah, Wind and Truth is out, or it will be out on Friday. This book is a big deal for a few reasons. One is Brandon Sanderson, writing god of a man that he is. Anytime he puts a new book out, it's a big deal. The Stormlight Archive is his magnum opus, his attempt at doing something like, The Wheel of Time, which he also wrote books for, or Malazan Book of the Fallen. that kind of sweeping, door-stopping tome epic fantasy series. Audio listeners, you can't see this, but I have some of the previous books on the shelf behind me. They're massive. Each one of these is big enough that if you were on a subway, you could defend yourself in a pinch with it.
In Montreal.
Yes, in Montreal or anywhere. But yeah, they're all about 1,000 pages. They're huge epic books. I love the Stormlight Archive, largely because the world is so imaginative and cool. It's kind of this craggy world that is racked by storms, and all of the geology has adapted to it. All of the human buildings and stuff have adapted to it. Like, people build buildings on like the leeward side of hills so that the storm breaks over them. There's a lot of really cool magic. At this point, we're pretty deep in it. So the one thing I will say for Wind and Truth is that this is like a Cosmere fans book. Like, no one who hasn't read a buttload of Brandon Sanderson books should be picking this up, in my opinion. Yes, Dan.
Are you saying that? So do you need to have I mean, I understand you needing to have read the first 4 Stormlight books to enjoy this one. Are you saying you need to have read other books that are not Stormlight Archive books to fully appreciate this one?
Well, I would say yes and no. Sanderson does a really good job of making narratives. So all of these books, like Mistborn and the Stormlight Archive, Elantris is another one. All of those are set in this same fictional universe, the Cosmere, on different planets in different solar systems around it. He does a pretty good job of keeping each distinct series like comprehensible on its own. So like, you read the first Mistborn, like, you don't need to have read anything else to get that first Mistborn trilogy. All of them are kind of like that. I think Wind and Truth it has probably some of the most wider Cosmere elements of any of his books. It's still very much a Roshar story, but this is like the culmination of the first arc of the Stormlight Archive. It's kind of almost the culmination of his first arc of the Cosmere, because after this, he's taking a hiatus from Stormlight for like 6 years, and he's doing a third Mistborn trilogy and 2 sequels to Elantris, which was his debut novel that fans have been waiting like 20 years for sequels for. He's finally going back and doing those. So I would say, no, you don't need to have read other books in the Cosmere to get what's happening in this book. But I do think this one benefits more than most of them from having read other books. The one exception I'll say is Warbreaker. Warbreaker is a standalone book. I consider that part of the Stormlight Archive almost. It's set on a different planet, but he wrote it as basically a supplementary book to the Stormlight Archive, giving a backstory of a character from it. So Warbreaker, I would definitely include. But aside from that, you could get away with it, but the more you read, the more stuff you'll pick out.
Okay, thank you. That was a very thorough explanation. I have a question for you, and Victor has a good question for you. I want to ask mine first. Daniel, simple question.
Yes.
Did you enjoy the book? Or not?
Yes.
Why or why not?
Yes. So I loved the book. You know, and the Stormlight, it doesn't take a lot to get me to love a Stormlight book. Like, it is one of my favorite series of all time. The Way of Kings is a book that has a very, very special place in my heart. I really loved that book, and it hooked me. So yes, Wind and Truth, I really enjoyed. I felt like Sanderson did an excellent job with it. He took it's really nice and refreshing to me because, you know, he's written, I don't know how many books are in the Cosmere at this point. It's got to be around 20 at least. But even still with that, he's willing to take risks and do different things. And I think he really, did that with Wind and Truth in a lot of ways that people will see once they read it. Right down to the one thing I can say, this is not really a spoiler because it's been talked about pretty broadly at this point, but the format of this book is a little bit different. So every Stormlight book is basically broken into 5 parts. That's a format he has stuck with, where it's like part 1, part 2, so on. This one does not follow that same format. It's basically the 10 days before this contest of champions that's supposed to happen. And instead of the 5-part format, we get each day, still with like interludes and stuff like that. And being able to switch things up to try new things this late in the series, I think that really, really benefits Sanderson's work as a whole. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I found it incredibly satisfying. I teared up at one point. Between this, shows like Arcane, whatever, they've been putting me through the emotional ringer, man. But yeah, I think Cosmere fans, Stormlight fans are going to be really happy. He does some weird things. This is definitely probably one of the more experimental of the Stormlight Archive books in terms of his willingness to just take big swings. But I think that I liked that. So yes, I loved this book. And I saw someone a while back, I think it was Dragonheart 613. Sorry if I'm getting your numbers wrong. You're higher up in the chat now. Saying that they didn't love the cover for Wind and Truth. And I will just say, so all of these covers are the same person, Michael Whelan, who is like a legendary figure in the fantasy and sci-fi like book space in terms of cover art. He's been doing it since like the 70s, 60s. He did like the Dragon Riders of Pern, like all sorts of books.
That's cool.
And I didn't love this cover at first either. I also didn't particularly love the title of this book at first either. Having read it, I appreciate them both much more now, which kind of happened to me with the last book, Rhythm of War, which I thought had a good title, and I love the cover for that one, which is this guy right here, or this lady. It's got Shallan on the cover. Love that cover. I appreciated both the cover art and the title a lot more after reading it, and I had the same experience with Wind and Truth, where after reading it, I was like, okay, man, I see what you're doing here, and I like it.
For the record, I like the title Wind and Truth. I have not read some of the Archive books. I think it's a good, evocative title. Yeah. I think The Last Metal is a bad title, but I don't really understand that one either. Victor has a good question for you about the length of these Doorstopper tomes.
Yes.
Victor says, my hesitation with any of these door stoppers is the feeling that the story could be 50% trimmed down. Does the story truly deserve 10,000-page books? And saying that I've read plenty of long stories and most of them feel like they were padded out by 30-50%. Is there any of that kind of thing going on in Wind and Truth, Daniel?
Maybe a little bit. I think that is an interesting complaint to me. So yes, I did think about that as I was reading, and like I've thought about that with other Stormlight Archive books. So that is it's a fair comment. You know, could it be trimmed down? Probably. But on the flip side of that is I think there are things you can do with pacing in a very long fantasy book like this that are just not as effective with a shorter book. So not to say it needs to be exactly 1,300 pages, but I think if it was a 700-page book, there would be things about it that don't feel quite the same. Because Sanderson, he's not making these this size on accident. You know, he is one of those people, and I also fall into this category, who came up loving the door-stopping tome fantasy books. And he's writing these for people who love those books. So I think it's a valid question, and they're not for everyone. You know, it's kind of funny because they've been releasing sample chapters for this book on Reactor, which is tor.com. And they've released like the first like 34 however many chapters, which is around like the first like 300 pages, and it's like that's a whole book you released as sample chapters basically. But that's just kind of the nature of these beasts. So could it be trimmed down? Yes. Did it need to be trimmed down? I don't think so. I wished I had more time with it, I will say. And it's a 1,300-page book, so that is saying something.
I do think there is a kind of person who loves these big fantasy books for whom a giant book is a plus. They like part of the point is to get lost in this maybe overstuffed world and just kind of be able to take up a lot of your time. I also do get, like, I'm someone who appreciates a good bit of brevity, but I have loved door stoppers, although I also
Yeah.
critique them when they get too stuffy. Although I do take Victor's point that those sorts of concerns don't matter if you've been in from the first book. Coming in now, that's a 5,000 page commitment minimum I
Yeah.
need to gird myself for. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'll admit, I'm not sure I'm going to start the Stormlight Archive because, like, man, halfway through a 5-book series and everyone's over 1,000 pages is a lot.
Yeah.
Do you think this kind of book? Here's another question for you.
Sure.
Does this book have, like, I don't know, commercial appeal? Because Sanderson's popularity has been on the rise for a long time. Is this the kind of book that's going to get new people on board?
This book in particular, I think the biggest thing that this one has in particular going for it is that now there is a fairly finished chunk. I do want to specify here, Sanderson pointed this out in that Esquire profile. I saw someone mentioning in the chat that people are comparing this to like Avengers Endgame because, you know, there's more Cosmere elements, presumably stuff like that. I don't quite think that's a fair comparison. He pushed back on it, and I think he was right to push back on it because this is the midpoint of the series. It ties off a lot of important elements, but it is not the same as Mistborn, where the first trilogy ends and then there, you know, it's going to be a whole different cast of characters. You know what I mean? So like the first trilogy of Mistborn books ends and then it jumps forward like centuries and totally different characters, totally different technological era. Sanderson has already said, so this is again not me spoiling it, but he's confirmed he's confirmed the flashback characters for books 6 through 10, and they're all characters we have met already in the Stormlight Archive. Like Yasna,
that one.
he is a planner, yeah. So like Yasna, who is one of the main characters, like will get flashbacks eventually. So the biggest thing is this feels like an ending, if not the ending of the series. So I think that holds a certain appeal because there are a lot of people who won't start reading a series until it is finished because they were spurned by Patrick Rothfuss and George R.R. Martin, among other reasons. And this now feels like a point where you could say to someone, look, even if you are one of those people, there's now a finished enough chunk of this that you should start it if you're interested. That said, I don't think the Stormlight Archive is the sort of series that can easily reach readers outside of fantasy fans. I think I think, you know, something like Harry Potter or A Song of Ice and Fire, part of the reason those became such massive successes is that they're like breakout books, and that they could, people who don't like strictly read fantasy can still enjoy them. They're not impenetrable. They're not filled with truly wild and weird fantasy ideas, like even something like the Wheel of Time kind of is. And there's a phrase for this in book publishing that is evading me, but I don't think the Stormlight Archive is one of those, because it wears its fantasy love on its sleeve. Like, this dude wasn't trying to, you know, write a book and, you know, it's fantasy, but it's for people who maybe don't think that's cool. Like, he thinks fantasy is goddamn cool, and he knows you do too if you like these 1,000-page books. So here you go. So yeah, that's a very long-winded answer, but hopefully it made some sense.
Very cool. Do you have any Victor asks, is there a gateway book to Sanderson's world? I think you've read around the Cosmere.
I have.
If people want to get into Stormlight Archive or any of Sanderson's work, where should they start? Should someone just jump right into reading the Stormlight Archive? Get into the pool.
I think the nice thing with Stormlight is that you don't. I think it's one of the few series in the Cosmere where like not reading them all in a row feels kind of fine to me, because that's how he wrote them. Like, he took breaks between writing them to write other books and other series. I think the good starting points in my opinion, are the Mistborn trilogy, which is where you started. That's a
Right.
finished trilogy. You can kind of get a bite-sized idea of what Sanderson's, overall stuff is like, without being a massive commitment like Stormlight.
Scott agrees.
Yeah, Mistborn is totally that gateway book, I think. I like Elantris as a gateway book. That was Sanderson's first published novel. It's a standalone fantasy. It's also in the Cosmere. The main thing that Mistborn and Elantris have working against them is that they are very early books in his career, and they read like earlier books in his career. Like, he's grown a lot as a writer in the 20 years he's been publishing books, especially after doing The Wheel of Time, which he wrote the final 3 books for. Both the first Mistborn trilogy and Elantris came out before that. So they're a little less polished, I think, but they're still, good introductions to his world. I like going in publication order personally. So like, those are, I started with Elantris and then Mistborn. So I will always recommend that to people. But I think if you're intrigued by the Stormlight archive, you can also start with The Way of Kings. Like, if you like the big door stopping tome fantasies, you want to see what it's about. The Way of Kings is one of his best books, I think. The Stormlight archive is his best series, in my opinion. So I think starting with The Way of Kings is also a pretty great choice. That one is more likely to hook you and really turn you into a lifelong Cosmere fan, I think, than something like Elantris. Scott Eddy also says Warbreaker. You could read Warbreaker first, is what I would say to that. I would hesitate to recommend that as a very first Cosmere book, but you could totally read Warbreaker if you're interested in it. I like to slot Warbreaker in between Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, because that's the one I mentioned that ties into the Stormlight archive. It's basically a backstory for a character who appears in Stormlight. And it slots in very nicely there. So that would be where I would recommend reading it. But you could start with that one. So you have a lot of options. I've seen people recommend Trests of the Emerald Sea. That I wouldn't go for that one first, but you could. It's another standalone. It's kind of like The Princess Bride. It's got a fun narrator, Hoyd, who is one of he's a fun little Easter egg type character of Sanderson's, who appears in basically all of these books in one form or another. He's a world hopper. So yeah, again with the long-winded answers, but those are some gateway recs, I would say. Mistborn, Elantris, Way of Kings.
Well, you're a Brandon Sanderson fan. Long way answers are the way of things.
That's right.
Is there anything else you want to say about the Wind and Truth, Daniel?
Yeah, one other thing I will shout out. I saw Ben Jack say, Daniel, would the original title, Knights of Wind and Truth, not have worked as well? Kind of bummed he wasn't able to finish off the title acronym palindrome. So yes, this is a fun little tidbit. So there are these poems in the Stormlight archive called Kelix, I think. They're symmetrical poems that kind of match like the starting letters of each word, frontwards and backwards. And originally his idea was to do these first 5 books as one of those. So that's why you have like The Way of Kings, Words of Radiance, Oathbringer as the middle, Rhythm of War, which matches Words of Radiance backwards, WORROW. Originally, this book was going to mirror The Way of Kings. It was going to be titled Knights of Wind and Truth. He changed it to just Wind and Truth. I think it would have worked probably as well, but I think Wind and Truth is a better title for this book.
I agree.
Is what I'll say. For both because it's a little catchier, rolls off the tongue a little easier, and I think it's a little more resonant than just Knights of Wind and Truth would have been. Is my answer.
It feels a little less like a dorky fantasy novel, which is not a bad thing, but just Wind and Truth feels a little more literary, which again is a good or a bad thing depending on your perspective. But it does class up the joint a bit.
Yeah, and I think that fits this book because this is one of the more philosophical books series, I think. Like this one, The Way of Kings, that's part of what got me into The Way of Kings was it's a little more philosophical than some of the later ones. And I think Wind and Truth kind of mirrors that a little bit. So the slightly more literary sounding title, I think, works for this.
Cool. As Victor says, he thinks the Wind and Truth is too close to the Winds of Winter, which I disagree with because I did not think of the Winds of Winter at all when hearing Wind and Truth.
Yeah.
But if that's what you think when you hear it, that reaction is valid.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think this is one of those things where, you know, it's so interesting because Martin's titles are often, aside from a Game of Thrones, which is just so iconic, they're often a little more nebulous, you know, like they might have a throwaway line.
Again,
they're kind of like drilling down on themes and stuff. Like the Sanderson titles are all very like in-world referencey. Like they're all referencing an actual physical book that exists in that specific novel. Like there is a book called Knights of Wind and Truth in the novel Wind and Truth. It's also relevant to some other things in that book. So yeah, I am with you, Dan. I kind of disagree, but Victor, that is very valid.
Yeah, we're not here to invalidate you. So Daniel, anything else to say about it? Your premiere review, spoiler-free review of Wind and Truth?
I don't think so. Everybody who's digging into it, I hope you enjoy it. I will have a longer written spoiler-free review going up on the site on Friday for release day. We will get into spoilers for this book on winteriscoming.net in the coming weeks. We're going to leave a little bit of runtime before we dig into the implications of this book to give people enough time to read it. But I hope you all enjoy it. I'm excited to chat about this book more in time.
Can you describe your favorite part without spoiling anything?
No.
Okay.
Wait. I will say
you could use colors. You could use noises.
Okay. No, I got this.
Okay.
Esquire guy gave me an out here because he mentioned that the end takes some really big swings. And I will just say, Sanderson, there's a famous thing he's known for, which is called among fans the Sanderlanche, because he tends to have a bunch of things happen near the end of his books. He's very good at writing climaxes. So I think the Sanderlanche is real for this one, is what I will say.
Very cool. That is true. Even in the Mistborn ones, those puppies really revved up toward the end.
He's really good at writing endings, and that holds true here, is what I will say.
All right. Well, Daniel, I'm glad you can give us your exclusive premiere spoiler-free review of Wind and Truth, the Fifth Stormlight Archive book by Brandon Sanderson. Thank you very much. Shall we move on to discuss what we are watching and or reading, and ask our audience, everyone of you out there listening and watching, what you're watching and reading, and whether you're liking it or whether you're not liking it? You're talking a lot this episode, I know, but you also put the outline together. I can go for a second.
Yeah, you go.
I'm watching everything I'm usually watching. I'm watching Dune Prophecy. I've gotten to watch ahead on that. I'm almost done with it. I'm going to ask you what you think about it in a second. So my attempt to talk for a while is going to go up in smoke. I'm still enjoying this show. I like it. I like the mood. I think it's put together very nicely. I'm into the characters. I want to see what becomes of Valia and Tula Harkonnen. But you have been not as high on it. What do you think of this latest episode?
I liked... So this latest episode, I enjoyed a lot. It is getting me a little bit more into Dune Prophecy. It does feel
3 left.
I know that you pushed back on the Game of Thrones comparison. This episode made me feel it a lot because there were some settings that were kind of reminiscent. A few people had Game of Thrones accents a little bit in a way that
British.
No, I mean specifically Northern Irish or Northern English, like the North accent. A couple of characters had that specific accent, which is not a big deal, but it did. It reminded me of it.
Fair. I mean, it is a real accent in the UK.
But we're not in the UK. We're on Caladan and whatever.
Yeah, but we're casting people who live in the planet Earth.
Hey, all I'm saying they can make up weird accents. They're actors, and they can act the weird accents.
Who has ever made up a weird accent? I can think of Mysaria
Silo,
has
man.
House of Dragons season 1 and nobody liked it.
Watch you some Silo. All right, I made fun of the accents on Silo.
Okay, sorry.
But yeah, so no, the accents didn't distract me too much, but it did remind me a little bit of it. Not saying that's a huge thing, but in general, I enjoyed this episode a lot. I thought the twists with Tula was really good.
That's good. That's nice.
You know, being heartless. I really liked seeing the icy planet with the furry whales. I thought that was some really cool world building. I'm more excited. I am, like you said, 3 episodes into a 6-episode season, but I am getting hooked. I am excited to watch the back half of this season.
Ben Jack is right. The White Lotus does start in February. HBO some stuff coming up, which will be fun. Beyond that, I'm watching What We Do in the Shadows. Not a ton. I'm rewatching the anime Trigun for some reason at night. I have no idea why. And that's about it for me. How about you, Dan?
So I'm still watching Silo. We're cruising close up to the halfway point on the season here. I've been enjoying it a lot. I love Silo. I love Rebecca Ferguson. She's great in that show. Tim Robbins is killing it. So aside from Wind and Truth, I actually snuck another book in the middle of reading Wind and Truth because I needed a break because it was so dense. So I read this book, The Last Hour Between Worlds by Melissa Caruso. This is another one I want to review soon. I enjoyed this a lot. Basically, magical investigator, single mother on her one night off after just having a kid, goes to a year-turning party, and then it gets pulled down through different dimensions. So she is forced to give up her night off and crack the case. And it's a fun, kind of quippy novel. She has to work with her kind of love interest, sapphic love interest, who is a famed thief. Really fun book. I enjoyed it a lot. And the whole thing takes place at this party going through weirder levels of dimensions. The only other thing that I watched this week that is probably worth discussing is Skeleton Crew. I did watch.
How was it? No,
I watched the first
I haven't seen
episodes. I was kind of meh. I really didn't like the first episode. I'll be honest. Right. It is pretty much entirely in like a suburban Star Wars planet, and it just felt weird. Cool, the kids were doing like standardized testing, and you know it's bad when Anakin Skywalker's life as a literal slave was less depressing than the lives of these suburban Star Wars kids.
That's so 80s, isn't it? Like the suburbs are hell, get out of here, they're the worst, they're evil. Okay, go on.
Yeah. But beyond that, the second episode has a lot more space pirates, and the space pirates are really fun. So I think that is, it seems like the show is getting better. I'm intrigued enough that I am going to watch the next episodes. But it had a really rocky start, and I am nervous for the children, Dan, because the kids are all good actors, but the writing hasn't been spectacular on it so far. And I just, Disney and Lucasfilm have kind of had a track record of getting people and then leaving them out to dry, the actors to face backlash. So like, protect these children, because it's not their fault that the opening episodes were kind of meh. But I'm hopeful it's going to improve from here.
Well, someone please think of the children. Okay, I haven't watched it yet.
Yes.
I was considering it. We'll see if I put time aside for it. Julie is watching Yellowstone, which I think the last season is on right now. Free of Kurt Russell, that's who's in it, right? That's the big star? Or is it Kevin Costner? Who cares? So Yellowstone's running, and
Kevin Costner, yeah.
Kevin Costner, yes, sorry. Whatever boomer star is in it. Landman is kind of a Yellowstone-esque tale of industry that is definitely getting traction. I believe it's by Taylor Sheridan, the Yellowstone Man.
Okay.
And Outlander, of course. Outlander is still going strong. Jamie Fraser is, might be dead, but very probably isn't. But yeah, that show is also thrilling its fan base. And Yellowstone, it's a big deal. That show was huge for a few years. I feel like it kind of dropped off a bit in mind share over the past few years, but it still deserves a good final season.
Yeah, Yellowstone's a big deal. I've never watched it. probably never will, because there's 100% too few dragons in that show for my taste. But I am happy for everyone who's enjoying it.
You don't
Um,
love Kurt Costner or Kevin Russell?
not enough that I'm gonna drag myself through that ranching show. No. Uh, yeah, cool. Well, that sounds like it's been a good time.
Yeah. Shall we go on, Dan, to the WiC News Lightning Round, where we go through a bunch of stories we couldn't get to me by the show and give our 20-second opinions on them, no more no less?
Let's do it. I just want to shout out Chris Grabenstein asked about the Wind and Truth cover. We talked
Oh, yeah.
about it, so rewind a little bit
Yeah, man.
and you will see it.
It does look a little like kind of standard fantasy. I really like the history behind the cover. Like the
Yeah.
fact it's made by this person who's been in it for a long time.
Yeah. So it's even cooler than that. So Michael Whelan, Brandon Sanderson loved his art. The book that got Brandon Sanderson into fantasy, which was Dragon something by Barbara Hamley. I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of this. Dragon's Bane. Dragon's Bane is a book one of Brandon Sanderson's teachers gave him that got him into fantasy as a kid, and that's a Michael Whelan cover. So it was like a huge deal for him personally to get Michael Whelan to do this. And Michael Whelan is actually retiring after this Wind and Truth cover. So yeah.
Lots of I give the story of the cover like an A+, and the cover itself like a nice C+, B-.
I think that's fair. And I will say again, I think people will like it more after they read it. It's still not my favorite Stormlight cover. I think that's a toss-up between Way of Kings and Rhythm of War for me personally.
Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah, let's do it.
Lightning round. I did arrange these. You're going to answer the odd ones because some of them will make you angry, and I think that's funny. So, Daniel, let's cue this up. The Witcher star Graham McTavish promises a seamless transition from Henry Cavill to Liam Hemsworth. Do you believe him?
I mean, I think he has to say that.
It sucks.
Well, yeah, it's an awful transition. I'm sure they're going to do an interesting job of it. How seamless will it be? We'll see. We'll see, Graham McTavish. We will see.
Bam.
All right. So Speedy will never be buzzed into infamy. Here's a fun one. Dan, tell us about this. Disney apparently asked Ryan Reynolds to cut one line from Deadpool and Wolverine, and it was about Mickey Mouse's genitalia.
Yeah, basically, so there's a line where Deadpool's complaining about how cheap Disney is. Why can't they afford more cameos? I think it's like, I can't breathe with Mickey Mouse's apparatus down my throat. And they cut that, and they replaced it with something else. I think it was the only line they had to change. I think it would have been funny with the original. Come on, Disney. Have a laugh at yourself.
Loosen up, Disney.
All right, Daniel. The Last of Us Season 2 is on track to come out in the spring of 2025 on HBO.
Exciting. That's a little bit later than I expected, because Season 1 came out in like a January. I expected this to come out in like a January. But that's still pretty much in line with what we had hoped. I'm excited for it. I can't wait for The Last of Us Season 2. I hope it's great. Play the video game if you haven't and want some emotional damage. All right. Here's another fun one for you, Dan. Wicked Part 2 is adding 2 new songs to Act 2 of the stage show for the second movie.
Normally, I'd be concerned about this because I think the first movie, which I loved, by the way, was very close to the stage show and was very successful. And I'm like, don't change too much. But the first one was so good, I'm inclined to think that they're going to know what they're doing. So I'll be fine with this and I'll go along. John M. knows what he's doing. Sam Schwartzman knows what he's doing. Ariana Grande said they even know what they're doing. Wicked movie. Goodness knows. Okay. Daniel, I really want to ask you this one. Francesca Gardner, the showrunner behind HBO's new Harry Potter TV show, has said that, or it's been concluded that she's going to stick very close to the original Harry Potter books. You want to watch the show now?
I think this excuse of sticking close to the Harry Potter books is just as much of a cash-in, stupid, ridiculous corporate move as all of the little tertiary Harry Potter things Rowling has released over the years, the movies were not that unfaithful to the books.
It's
Be
true.
serious. This is like, I'm the Brian Cox meme. You're not serious, people. That's how I feel anytime that show comes up. All right. Josh Brolin, however, is a serious person. He says he'll quit acting if Denis Villeneuve doesn't get an Oscar nod for Dune Part 2.
Yeah, I mean, I would like Denis Villeneuve to get an Oscar nod for Dune Part 2. I think the movie was very, very good. But now that I've heard this, I hope he doesn't. I think it'd be funny if Josh Brolin got confronted with this and then had to quit acting. I like Josh Brolin too. I just think it'd be best thing for the world would be to make people laugh by having this actually come to pass. So no Oscar Denis Villeneuve. All right, I'm going to ask you the next one because I know you like this program. Daniel, check it out. Walton Goggins is back in the ghoul makeup for Fallout Season 2. They're filming again.
Yeah, that's pretty rad. I loved Fallout. I'm glad to see them back filming again. You know, they took a little time off, but first season, I don't mind that as much because they needed to see if the show is going to do well enough. Yeah. Goggins is great. I loved seeing him in a lead role like this. Yeah, sign me up. Yeah,
we're doing great today.
We're
killing it.
We are the Lightning today. All right, Dan, let us end our world famous, like the Fire and Blood drawing, world famous lightning round with this one, which is that Wednesday season 2 has wrapped filming.
Yeah. I didn't watch Wednesday season 1. I know it was hugely popular, Adam Family thing. Someone said, I think it was Victor, talked about how interest for a show lags between seasons. This will be a test. Wednesday was a huge hit in 2020, whatever, but it's been like 3 years when it will come out. Like, will it still be that popular? Will the kids who enjoyed that now be, I don't know, having kids of their own? Probably not. Yeah. But we'll see how it goes. That is our show. Public service announcement. Next week, next Wednesday, we usually have the show. We stream it every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, 3 p.m. on the East Coast, and noon on the West Coast. And what are the mountains? I can't say 3 and not say the 4th. It doesn't make any sense to me. We usually do that. Next week, we are going to be off, technically. We're not going to have a live show. However, we have pre-recorded a video for y'all. So we will have a new video going live at 2 p.m. next Wednesday that won't have interaction because it's not live streamed.
We won't really be here.
We won't really be here. We'll be elsewhere. But it'll be here, and you can watch it and pretend you're talking to us, which I think is very healthy. Victor asked, we're taking off for Christmas and New Year's. We haven't quite decided what exactly we're going to do. Probably for at least one of those. Maybe we'll pre-record something else. Yeah. We will see. But next week we'll be gone. But also, no, we won't. Because we'll still be here with the new video. It's going to go up the exact same time we normally would be here. And if you still want more of us even after that, like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends. Go to winnerscoming.net.com. Check out all the stuff we write about over there. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you. We love doing this. And have a pleasant evening or morning, depending on where in the world you are. Goodbye.
Take care, all.